Some people post every smile to be seen, while others protect their silence because they finally learned their worth does not need an audience. We are living in a time where being seen has become almost as important as being alive. Everywhere you look, people are sharing photographs, achievements, emotions, relationships, vacations, meals, and even private struggles, all placed carefully before an invisible audience waiting to react. Social media has transformed ordinary moments into performances, and slowly, many people have begun to believe that their experiences only become meaningful once other people acknowledge them. A quiet dinner no longer feels complete unless it is posted. A beautiful sunset somehow feels less beautiful if nobody comments on it. Even happiness itself has become something many people feel pressured to display rather than genuinely experience. And within this modern psychological reality, an important confusion has emerged, the confusion between visibility and validation. Visibility is simply being noticed. It is external. It depends on how many people are watching, reacting, commenting, or paying attention. Validation, however, is far deeper and far more dangerous when misunderstood. Validation is the emotional feeling of being accepted, worthy, important, or valuable. The problem begins when people start using visibility as a substitute for validation. They begin to believe that attention equals love, that likes equal respect, and that online admiration equals personal worth. This creates a fragile emotional foundation because anything built on public opinion can disappear overnight. The human mind becomes trapped in a cycle where self-esteem rises and falls, depending on reactions from strangers, acquaintances, or followers who may not even genuinely care. Psychologically, this pattern is deeply connected to emotional dependency. Every notification triggers anticipation. Every comment creates temporary emotional satisfaction. The brain starts associating visibility with emotional reward. Over time, people unconsciously train themselves to seek external reassurance before they can feel secure internally. They stop asking themselves whether they are truly happy and begin asking whether they appear happy to others. That shift changes everything. Life slowly transforms from a personal experience into a public presentation. Instead of living naturally, people begin editing themselves for acceptance. They adjust their personality, appearance, opinions, and even emotions according to what receives approval. This is why some individuals become deeply anxious when they are ignored online. Silence feels personal to them. A lack of attention feels like rejection. When a photo receives fewer reactions than expected, it affects their mood. When someone else receives more attention, comparison immediately begins. The emotional problem is no longer about the content being shared. The real issue is the emotional dependency created underneath it. A person who depends on visibility for validation eventually loses the ability to feel valuable without external confirmation. Their confidence becomes conditional. Their peace becomes unstable. Their identity becomes vulnerable to public opinion. People who choose not to constantly post their photos often develop a completely different psychological relationship with themselves. Many of them are not avoiding visibility because they are insecure. In many cases, they simply no longer depend on external attention to confirm their worth. They do not feel the same urgency to prove they are attractive, successful, loved, or fulfilled. Their emotional stability comes from internal experiences rather than public reactions. This creates a quieter form of confidence that many people misunderstand. Society often associates confidence with loud self-expression and constant visibility, but genuine self-assurance is usually much calmer. A person who is truly secure does not feel the need to repeatedly announce their value because they already feel connected to it internally. There is also something psychologically liberating about no longer needing every meaningful moment to become public content. When validation stops depending on visibility, people begin experiencing life differently. They become more present. Conversations become more authentic because they are not interrupted by the need to capture them. Joy becomes more natural because it is no longer performed for approval. Relationships become more intimate because they are protected from unnecessary public exposure. Even success begins to feel more satisfying when it is enjoyed privately instead of constantly displayed. Many people fear invisibility because modern culture constantly teaches them that attention determines significance. But psychologically, there is enormous strength in becoming comfortable without constant recognition. A person who no longer needs to be seen by everyone gains emotional independence. They stop living under the pressure of maintaining an image. They stop measuring their worth through comparison. They stop exhausting themselves trying to remain relevant in the eyes of others. Instead, they begin building a quieter relationship with themselves, one based on authenticity rather than performance. And perhaps that is why some of the most emotionally balanced individuals are often the least visible online. They understand something many people spend years trying to learn. Attention can attract admiration, but it cannot replace inner peace. One of the greatest misunderstandings in modern society is the belief that loudness represents strength while silence represents weakness. People are often taught to associate confidence with constant expression, public presence, and visible activity. The individuals who speak the most, share the most, and display the most are frequently assumed to be the strongest personalities in the room. Yet psychology repeatedly reveals a much deeper truth. Emotional strength is very often quiet. In many cases, the people who reveal the least are carrying the greatest level of self-control, emotional awareness, and inner stability. Silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes silence is restraint. Sometimes it is wisdom. Sometimes it is the result of a person learning difficult lessons about people, attention, trust, and emotional survival. Many individuals who avoid constantly posting their photos or personal lives online are not disconnected from the world. They are simply no longer emotionally dependent on public visibility. Their silence is not a cry for attention. It is a sign that they have stopped needing constant reassurance from others. Emotionally strong people often become more private because they understand how exhausting external validation can be. They know that the more a person seeks approval from the outside world, the more emotionally vulnerable they become. Every opinion starts carrying weight. Every criticism becomes painful. Every comparison creates insecurity. Strong individuals gradually recognize this emotional trap and begin protecting their peace by limiting unnecessary exposure. They understand that not every thought needs to be shared, not every emotion needs to be displayed, and not every moment needs an audience. There is also a psychological maturity that develops when someone learns to process emotions internally instead of immediately broadcasting them publicly. Many people use social media as an emotional outlet because they are searching for comfort, sympathy, attention, or reassurance. While there is nothing inherently wrong with expressing emotions, emotionally resilient individuals often learn how to sit with their feelings privately first. They develop the ability to reflect before reacting. They do not allow every emotional wave to control their actions. This creates a calmer personality that can appear distant or mysterious to others, but in reality, it often reflects deep emotional discipline. Silence can also emerge from painful experiences that taught someone the value of protecting their inner world. People who have experienced betrayal, disappointment, manipulation, or judgment frequently become more selective about what they reveal. They understand that not everyone who watches them supports them. Not everyone who asks questions genuinely cares. Some people observe only to compare, criticize, gossip, or secretly compete. Over time, emotionally intelligent individuals begin realizing that privacy is a form of self-protection. They stop giving unlimited access to their emotions, relationships, struggles, and personal victories. Psychologically, this kind of silence often indicates increased self-awareness. The person no longer feels responsible for constantly proving their happiness, success, or worth to the outside world. They become less interested in performing and more interested in living authentically. Their energy shifts away from maintaining appearances and toward preserving emotional balance. This is why many emotionally strong people appear calm even during difficult situations. Their stability comes from internal grounding rather than external reactions. Another important reason silence can indicate emotional strength is because emotionally mature individuals understand the power of observation. Quiet people often notice details that constantly expressive people miss. Instead of always speaking, they listen. Instead of constantly displaying themselves, they study the behavior, intentions, and energy of others. This creates a deeper understanding of human nature. Many psychologically strong individuals become careful with words because they understand how much damage unnecessary expression can create. They recognize that silence often prevents conflict, protects dignity, and preserves emotional energy. There is also courage hidden inside silence. It takes strength to exist in a world obsessed with attention while refusing to constantly seek it. Modern culture rewards visibility. It encourages people to display every achievement, every emotion, and every aspect of their identity. Choosing privacy in such an environment requires confidence because it means accepting that your value does not depend on recognition. Emotionally strong people become comfortable with the idea that not everyone needs access to their life. They stop fearing invisibility because they no longer confuse being noticed with being important. Many people assume that quiet individuals are lonely, insecure, or disconnected, but often the opposite is true. Some people become quieter because they have finally found peace within themselves. They no longer feel pressured to explain everything, defend everything, or display everything. Their silence reflects emotional independence. It reflects self-control. It reflects the ability to remain centered without constant external affirmation. And perhaps this is why the strongest people are not always the loudest people. Very often, true emotional power reveals itself through calmness, restraint, patience, and the ability to remain at peace without demanding attention from the world around them. We are living in one of the most psychologically exposed periods in human history. Never before have people had such unlimited access to the personal lives of others. Every day, millions of individuals voluntarily reveal their emotions, relationships, achievements, routines, opinions, insecurities, and private moments to audiences that range from close friends to complete strangers. Social media has created an environment where visibility is rewarded instantly. The more personal the content becomes, the more attention it often receives. As a result, many people slowly begin believing that openness is necessary for relevance and that privacy somehow makes a person distant, secretive, or disconnected. Yet psychology suggests something very different. In many cases, the ability to protect one's privacy reflects emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and psychological balance. Attention is one of the most powerful emotional forces affecting modern behavior. Human beings naturally desire recognition because feeling seen and acknowledged activates emotional reward systems in the brain. Social media platforms are designed to intensify this response. Notifications, likes, comments, shares, and reactions all create small emotional rewards that encourage repeated behavior. Over time, many individuals unconsciously become dependent on this cycle. They begin sharing more frequently, revealing more deeply, and exposing more personally because attention temporarily satisfies emotional needs. The danger appears when attention stops being something enjoyed occasionally and becomes something psychologically required. A person addicted to attention often experiences discomfort in silence. Moments that are not shared publicly can begin to feel emotionally incomplete. Experiences lose value unless others witness them. Vacations become photo opportunities rather than opportunities for rest. Relationships become performances instead of private emotional connections. Even personal struggles are sometimes transformed into content before they are fully understood internally. In this environment, privacy begins to feel unnatural because modern culture constantly encourages exposure. People are taught to reveal themselves endlessly in order to remain visible and socially relevant. But psychologically, healthy individuals often move in the opposite direction. They gradually discover that constant exposure creates emotional exhaustion. The more access people have to your life, the more opinions, judgments, comparisons, and expectations begin surrounding you. Privacy becomes a way to protect emotional energy. It creates boundaries between the inner self and the outside world. Emotionally mature individuals understand that not every part of life becomes healthier through public attention. Some experiences need silence in order to grow naturally. Some emotions need reflection rather than reaction. Some relationships become stronger when they are protected from unnecessary visibility. Privacy also creates psychological freedom. A person who does not constantly broadcast every detail of life experiences less pressure to maintain an image. They do not need to continuously prove they are successful, attractive, happy, productive, or admired. Their self-worth becomes less dependent on public perception. This reduces anxiety because their identity is no longer controlled by external reactions. They are free to evolve privately without feeling observed at every stage of their growth. In contrast, people who live under constant public exposure often experience invisible emotional pressure to remain consistent with the identity they have presented online, even when their real feelings or circumstances change. Another important psychological aspect of privacy is emotional safety. Many individuals become more private after experiencing betrayal, criticism, jealousy, or manipulation. They learn that not everyone who watches them wishes them well. Some people use personal information to compare, compete, gossip, or judge. This realization changes how emotionally intelligent people interact with public attention. They become more selective about what they reveal because they understand that privacy protects peace. Instead of allowing unlimited access to their emotions and personal life, they create boundaries that preserve emotional stability. There is also a deep psychological difference between connection and exposure. Many people confuse the two. Genuine connection does not require constant public sharing. A person can have meaningful relationships, deep emotions, and authentic experiences without displaying everything online. In fact, excessive exposure sometimes weakens emotional intimacy because private moments lose their sacredness once they become public performances. Emotionally balanced individuals often recognize that the most meaningful experiences in life feel more valuable when they are lived fully instead of constantly documented for approval. People who value privacy are often misunderstood because modern society glorifies visibility. Quiet individuals may appear distant, mysterious, or socially detached simply because they refuse to participate in the culture of endless exposure. Yet many of them are not hiding from life. They are protecting the quality of their inner world. They understand that peace grows more easily in protected spaces than in environments filled with constant observation and judgment. Psychologically, privacy allows people to maintain a stronger connection with their authentic identity. Without the pressure of performing for others, individuals can think more honestly, feel more naturally, and grow more freely. They stop shaping themselves according to trends, expectations, and reactions. Instead, they begin listening more carefully to their own emotions, values, and instincts. In a world addicted to attention, choosing privacy often becomes an act of emotional independence, self-respect, and quiet psychological strength. One of the most powerful psychological transformations a person can experience happens when self-worth stops depending on approval from other people. Many individuals spend years unconsciously building their identity around external reactions. They learn to measure themselves through compliments, recognition, praise, validation, popularity, and acceptance. From childhood, people are often rewarded for pleasing others, fitting expectations, and presenting versions of themselves that attract approval. Over time, this creates a dangerous emotional habit where personal value becomes connected to how others respond, rather than how a person genuinely feels about themselves internally. Social media has intensified this psychological pattern dramatically. Every photograph, opinion, achievement, or life update becomes an opportunity for evaluation. Reactions are counted publicly. Attention becomes measurable. Approval becomes visible in numbers. In this environment, many people slowly begin attaching their emotional stability to external feedback without even realizing it. A successful post creates temporary confidence. A lack of reactions creates insecurity. Comparison becomes constant because there will always be someone appearing more attractive, successful, admired, or fulfilled. As a result, self-worth becomes unstable because it is built on something that changes constantly: public opinion. Psychologically, approval can become emotionally addictive. The brain begins associating praise and attention with feelings of safety, importance, and acceptance. People start chasing these emotional rewards repeatedly because they temporarily relieve insecurity or self-doubt. But the problem with external approval is that it never creates permanent peace. It only creates temporary emotional relief. A person who depends on approval eventually needs more of it to feel emotionally secure. Silence begins to feel uncomfortable. Criticism becomes deeply painful. Rejection feels devastating because the individual has connected personal value to the reactions of others. This is why people who stop seeking constant approval often experience a profound internal shift. At first, the transition can feel uncomfortable because they are breaking a deeply conditioned emotional dependency. They begin realizing how much of their behavior was shaped by fear of judgment or desire for acceptance. They notice how often they filtered their personality to avoid criticism. They recognize how frequently they compared themselves to others. Slowly, they start separating their identity from external validation, and this process changes the way they experience life. When approval is no longer emotionally required, confidence becomes calmer and more stable. A person stops feeling the need to constantly prove themselves. They no longer wake up asking whether people admire them, notice them, or approve of them. Instead, they begin focusing on whether they respect themselves. This creates a deeper form of self-worth because it is rooted internally rather than externally. Their identity becomes less vulnerable to trends, opinions, and social comparison. They become emotionally freer because their happiness is no longer controlled by unpredictable public reactions. This transformation also changes relationships. People who rely heavily on approval often struggle to set boundaries because they fear disappointing others. They may say yes when they want to say no. They may tolerate disrespect to avoid rejection. They may constantly seek reassurance because they need external confirmation to feel secure. But when self-worth becomes internal, relationships become healthier and more authentic. A person stops sacrificing their emotional well-being just to maintain acceptance. They become more honest about their needs, values, and limits because their identity no longer depends on pleasing everyone around them. Another important psychological change happens in the way success is experienced. Individuals who depend on approval often pursue goals primarily for recognition. Achievements become performances designed to impress others. But once external approval loses its emotional power, motivation becomes more personal and meaningful. Success is no longer about proving worth to the world. It becomes about personal growth, fulfillment, peace, and alignment with one's values. This creates a quieter but far more satisfying relationship with achievement because the person is no longer emotionally starving for applause. People who stop needing approval also become more comfortable with privacy and silence. They no longer feel pressure to announce every accomplishment, display every emotion, or explain every decision. Their life stops becoming a performance. They begin understanding that their experiences remain valuable even when nobody else sees them. This emotional independence creates peace because the person no longer feels trapped inside the exhausting cycle of seeking recognition. There is also tremendous courage involved in letting go of approval-seeking behavior. Society constantly encourages people to remain visible, admired, and validated. Choosing not to participate fully in that system requires emotional maturity. It means accepting that some people may misunderstand you, overlook you, or criticize you. But psychologically strong individuals eventually realize something liberating. Being misunderstood is far less painful than losing yourself while trying to satisfy everyone else. As self-worth becomes internal, comparison begins losing its power. A person no longer feels threatened by the success, beauty, attention, or popularity of others because their value is no longer based on competition. They stop viewing life as a constant performance where they must prove superiority to deserve respect. Instead, they develop a quieter sense of security that comes from knowing their worth exists independently of public recognition, temporary admiration, or external applause. One of the greatest psychological contradictions of the modern world is that people have never been more connected digitally, yet so many individuals feel emotionally isolated internally. Social media creates the illusion of constant connection. People interact every hour through photographs, comments, stories, messages, reactions, and endless updates about their lives. From the outside, it appears that everyone is surrounded by attention and companionship. Yet beneath this endless activity, many people experience a deep emotional emptiness that becomes difficult to explain. This is why constant posting is not always a sign of confidence, happiness, or fulfillment. In many cases, it can quietly reveal loneliness, emotional hunger, and an intense desire to feel seen. Loneliness is not simply the absence of people. A person can be surrounded by attention and still feel emotionally disconnected. True loneliness often comes from feeling unseen, misunderstood, emotionally unsupported, or internally empty. Many individuals use social media as a temporary escape from these feelings. Every post becomes an attempt to create connection, attention, or reassurance. The reactions provide short emotional relief. Notifications create the feeling that someone is noticing them. Comments create the impression of interaction. But psychologically, this relief is often temporary because digital attention rarely satisfies deeper emotional needs. The brain responds strongly to social validation. Every like, comment, or reaction activates reward systems associated with pleasure and recognition. This is why posting can become emotionally addictive. For a brief moment, the person feels acknowledged. They feel visible. They feel important. But once the attention fades, the emotional emptiness often returns. This creates a cycle where individuals continue posting more frequently in search of repeated emotional reassurance. The behavior is not always driven by vanity. Very often, it is driven by emotional loneliness that the person themselves may not fully understand. Many people who constantly post are unconsciously searching for emotional confirmation. They want evidence that they matter to others. They want proof that someone is paying attention. They want reassurance that they are attractive, interesting, successful, loved, or socially accepted. Every reaction temporarily calms inner insecurity. But because the validation comes externally, it never creates lasting emotional stability. The person becomes dependent on repeated attention to maintain self-esteem. Silence online begins feeling emotionally uncomfortable because it can trigger feelings of invisibility or rejection. Psychologically, excessive posting can sometimes reflect unmet emotional needs in real life. A person who lacks deep emotional connection offline may attempt to compensate through online visibility. Someone who feels ignored in personal relationships may seek attention publicly. An individual struggling with insecurity may continuously post photographs in order to receive reassurance about appearance or worth. Even happiness itself is sometimes displayed excessively because people are trying to convince themselves emotionally as much as they are trying to convince others. This does not mean every active social media user is lonely, but it does reveal how emotional pain can hide behind constant visibility. Many people have mastered the ability to appear socially fulfilled while privately struggling with isolation, anxiety, emptiness, or sadness. Social media allows individuals to carefully control perception. They can display confidence while feeling insecure. They can appear connected while feeling emotionally abandoned. They can share smiling photographs while carrying deep internal exhaustion. The gap between public image and private emotional reality has become one of the defining psychological tensions of the digital age. Another important psychological factor is comparison. Constant posting often traps people inside a cycle where they continuously monitor how others respond to them compared to everyone else. They compare reactions, popularity, attractiveness, lifestyles, and attention levels. This intensifies loneliness because instead of creating genuine connection, social media can transform relationships into silent competitions for visibility and validation. A person may have hundreds of online interactions while still lacking a single emotionally safe relationship where they feel fully understood. People who rarely post their lives online are sometimes less emotionally dependent on this cycle. Because they are not constantly seeking public reactions, they often experience less pressure to maintain an image or compete for attention. Their emotional world becomes less controlled by external feedback. They may invest more energy into private conversations, meaningful experiences, and real-world emotional intimacy instead of public performance. As a result, their sense of connection can become deeper, even if their online visibility is lower. There is also something psychologically exhausting about constantly presenting yourself to the world. The pressure to appear interesting, attractive, productive, successful, or happy can slowly drain emotional energy. Many individuals become trapped in maintaining a version of themselves designed for public approval rather than authentic emotional expression. Over time, this creates emotional fatigue because the person is no longer simply living life. They are managing an identity. Loneliness becomes even more painful when a person feels surrounded by attention but starved of genuine emotional closeness. Public visibility cannot replace authentic human connection. 1,000 reactions cannot replace one deeply meaningful conversation. Endless followers cannot replace emotional safety. Constant exposure cannot heal internal emptiness. And this is why some of the loudest digital lives can sometimes hide the quietest emotional suffering. There is a quiet, psychological pattern that many people fail to notice in modern society. Some of the most emotionally peaceful individuals are often the least visible online. While the digital world encourages constant activity, endless self-presentation, and continuous sharing, there are people who slowly move away from the pressure of public visibility. They stop documenting every experience, stop announcing every emotion, and stop seeking attention for every achievement. From the outside, this behavior may seem unusual in a culture obsessed with exposure, but psychologically, it often reflects something very important. Inner peace reduces the need for constant external recognition. Modern social media culture is built around stimulation. Platforms are designed to keep people emotionally engaged through reactions, comparisons, trends, notifications, and endless streams of content. Every scroll introduces new information, new emotions, new opinions, and new reasons to compare oneself with others. While this environment can be entertaining, it can also become emotionally exhausting. Many individuals remain trapped in a cycle of overstimulation without realizing how deeply it affects their mental state. Their thoughts become crowded with comparison, insecurity, pressure, and the constant need to remain socially relevant. Peaceful people often recognize this emotional exhaustion earlier than others. They begin noticing how unnecessary exposure affects their energy, focus, and emotional balance. They understand that constant visibility invites constant evaluation. The more public your life becomes, the more opinions, comparisons, expectations, and judgments begin surrounding you. Emotionally balanced individuals gradually lose interest in participating in this exhausting cycle because they discover that peace grows more easily in quiet spaces than in environments dominated by attention-seeking behavior. Psychologically, peaceful people are often less driven by external validation. They do not depend heavily on public reactions to feel valuable, attractive, successful, or important. Their emotional stability comes from internal experiences rather than social approval. Because of this, they feel less pressure to constantly update others about their lives. They can enjoy meaningful moments privately without feeling the need to transform every experience into public content. Their happiness becomes something they experience internally rather than something they perform externally. This creates a major difference in how life is lived. Many people today experience moments while simultaneously thinking about how those moments will appear online. Vacations become photo opportunities, relationships become public displays, achievements become announcements. Even personal growth sometimes becomes content designed for admiration. Peaceful individuals often separate themselves from this mindset. They prefer to fully experience moments rather than interrupt them for visibility. They value emotional presence more than digital attention. This allows them to develop a calmer relationship with life itself. There is also a deep psychological connection between peace and privacy. People who are emotionally secure usually feel less need to explain themselves constantly. They do not feel obligated to prove their happiness, defend their choices, or display their accomplishments for public approval. This does not mean they lack ambition or confidence. In fact, many peaceful individuals are deeply successful and emotionally fulfilled. The difference is that their sense of identity is no longer dependent on being observed by others. They are comfortable knowing that their value exists even when nobody is watching. Another reason peaceful people are often less visible online is because they become more protective of their emotional energy. They understand that attention attracts not only admiration, but also judgment, negativity, comparison, jealousy, and unnecessary emotional noise. Many emotionally mature individuals have experienced the consequences of excessive exposure in the past. They may have dealt with criticism, betrayal, fake relationships, or emotional exhaustion caused by constantly managing public perception. Over time, they realize that not everyone deserves access to their inner world. Privacy becomes a form of emotional self-respect rather than secrecy. Peaceful individuals also tend to become more selective about relationships and interactions. Instead of seeking large amounts of attention from many people, they focus on deeper and more meaningful emotional connections. They value authenticity over popularity. They prefer conversations that feel real rather than interactions designed only for visibility. Because of this, their social lives may appear quieter from the outside, but emotionally, they are often far more stable and fulfilling than relationships built primarily around public attention. One of the most important psychological traits of peaceful people is their comfort with silence. Many individuals fear silence because it forces them to confront their thoughts, insecurities, and emotional emptiness. This is why they constantly seek distraction, stimulation, and attention. But peaceful people learn how to exist comfortably without constant noise. They are not afraid of being alone with themselves. They do not need endless reactions to feel alive. Their calmness comes from emotional acceptance rather than external stimulation. As people become more emotionally grounded, they often lose interest in proving themselves publicly. They no longer feel trapped in competition for visibility. They stop comparing their lives constantly with others. They stop chasing recognition that provides only temporary satisfaction. Instead, they begin prioritizing emotional stability, mental clarity, meaningful relationships, and personal freedom. Their lives may become less visible online, but internally, they often become far richer, calmer, and more emotionally complete.